I have a dream, that's all I need. I'll make it happen with some work and belief. Know what I want, so I'll take it on. I've made mistakes, but mistakes make you strong.
Hi there, I'm JB. Don't buy a house. Huh, what?
What?
That doesn't even make any sense!
Don't buy a house? That's the complete opposite of what we've been told all our lives. A house is an investment. No? You're telling me a house is a liability? Why? How come some random guy on YouTube makes this stupid statement? Don't buy a house. Ridiculous.
Stupid!
Well, let me explain and show you some examples, and one of them being one of my own houses. So, let's get into it.
Should not do it. You're doing it for very different reasons. This is not an investment because there have been periods of time in which people have made loads of money. Historically, like that's the anomaly. Historically, in the US and the UK, housing prices adjusted for inflation go nowhere. It's just been the last 20 or 30 years that there's this very brief window of time that owning a house was a great investment. Robert Shiller won the Nobel Prize about a decade ago for his work in showing that over the last 150 years in the United States, adjusted for inflation, most home prices have been flat as a pancake. It's just the last 20 years that have inflated people's expectations of what a house can do.
Buying a house is not always a good investment. Actually, often it isn't. So let's take a look at why I believe it's not a good investment. Why is it we have been told the American dream is a single-family house with a white picket fence, huh? Well, I won't go deep down that rabbit hole, but think about it. Who benefits from you spending around 30% or more of your income on a single item? This item will anchor you down for at least 30 years. It's the banks. Why banks? Well, they make a shit ton of money on all the interest, fees, spread in the underlying bonds, and so on and so on. Why are the banks not heavy regulated then? Well, they provide a service for the government and ensures that people work for a living to pay off their house, pay their taxes. Some would call it symbiosis. I call it parasitic. Go to school, get a job, pay your taxes, retire, and die. But enough of the politics. Back to the statement. Why do I say buying a house is a bad idea? Well, as I always say, it depends. If you buy a house because you think it's an investment, it's probably not. If you buy a house because you really want or need that house and you can afford it, it's not as bad. If you buy it and rent it out, then it's a great idea. But it all depends. Depends on you, your situation, your timeline, your net worth. A lot of factors go into this. Remember, the typical American will move around 7 times in their lifetime. And typically, that's every 7th year. Some stay longer at one place, others move more often. And every time, the banks are involved. So now it's a game of probability. What is the probability of the customer needing to refinance or finance something else? Very high. So why is it a bad idea to buy a house? Well, flexibility. The house works as an anchor, good or bad. Like in my situation, I got a job offer. I did not take it, as transportation would be too much in time and cost, even though it was a very good job that I really liked. Had I rented, I could have moved closer to that job. So my flexibility was impaired. Interest payments. Interest payments can be high, and as the owner of your main residence, you don't get all the nice tax deductions, only the deduction of the interest. And that's where the banks are smart. The bulk of the interest payments are beginning of the years. Preferably, the bank would like to have all the interest, or at least the bulk of it, within the first 7 years. Why could that be? The maintenance on the house. This is a big one, and very often forgotten, as it happens over the years and you don't really realize it. You might need a new water boiler, heating, plumbing, maybe a new roof in 10-15 years, new appliances every 7-10 years, gardening, tools, etc. Like yesterday, I just spent 4 hours of a Saturday fixing a stupid washing machine. A small hose had come off inside the machine. Easy fix, but still irritating. Yes, I could have spent $500 or more getting someone else to fix it, but I also hate to spend money on something I know I can fix myself. Then there's inflation. Inflation is around 3.76% average over the last 60 years. You need to factor that in too. And now comes one of the really big ones. It's something called opportunity cost. What if that money that you used for the down payment could have been invested at something else? Let's say that down payment could have been invested in the S&P 500 at 10% compound annual growth. Over 30 years, that's going to be a really big amount. So, if we instead of owning were renting, we would also invest that extra cash we would save every month, but more on that later in the example. Of course, when renting, we need to have a deposit, but it's nowhere near the down payment of a house. Then there are fees for buying and selling the house. The buyer usually ends up paying 3% in fees, often hidden in the sell price. And there are also closing costs, which are usually between 3 to 6%. And again, when selling, the seller pays around 5 to 6% in fees. And the bad thing here is, if the house appreciated, those 5 to 6% are a lot. So even though the average house appreciates with around 7%, which has it done over the last 30 years, it's 7.1%, I believe. These so-called phantom costs and inflation will eat that right up, and especially the opportunity cost. So even if the house appreciates, the money is poured out somewhere else. Yes, I know, if you move out before those expenses occur, but the buyer will probably factor in that in the price. If you need a new roof, if you need new appliances, and so on. So you need to add some amount of this into your calculations. We probably all heard their stories about someone who bought a house 50 years ago for, let's say, 100,000 and sold it for $1 million. Wow, that's incredible. A 10x. But is it really? What if we factor in all the interest paid, the maintenance, upgrades, roof, inflation, buying and selling cost, and so on, and so on, and so on, and especially the opportunity cost? Let's look at that example where someone bought a house, let's say 30 years ago, and sold it for $1 million. We use 5% as the interest rate in this example. With a $100,000 house, the down payment was $20,000. That's our opportunity cost. That down payment could have been invested in something yielding more than the appreciation of the house. The appreciation of a house was around 7% a year. The S&P 500 has around 10% compound annual growth. So let's go with 10%. It's not a crazy number to use for those $20,000 invested for 30 years. We have a loan to pay, $80,000. 30-year interest on that is around $75,000. Property taxes over time is around $81,000. The insurance cost on that over the time is around $72,000. Maintenance is set at $48,000, which is 2% of the value every year. Utilities around $108,000 over 30 years. And then we have the fees when we bought, around $6,000. We have fees when we sold, around $50,000. Remember, the house is now worth $1 million. Inflation we set low, around $27,000 over 30 years. And now the big one, the opportunity cost of the original down payment. If we invested those $20,000 in the S&P 500 with a 10% compound annual growth, that would have become $349,000. I know we could risk paying capital gains tax on those, but even with 15 to 20% tax, it won't make it any better. We are now at a total cost of ownership in those 30 years of $895,000.
What?
What? Wait a minute. Didn't we sell it for $1 million? That means we only made around $105,000? But still, getting $100,000 in cash isn't that bad, or is it?
I said, wait a minute.
If we instead rented a similar house, the calculations would have been a bit different. Average rent per month, 30 years adjusted, divided by 30 years, is around $772 every month. giving us a total rent in 30 years of around $638,000. Utilities around $100,000, so a bit over $738,000 in expenses over 30 years, and that's with a 5% increase in rent every year. But here's the kicker. As a renter, we did not have to pay $20,000 down, and we would have a bit over $700 more in our pocket every month. This could have been invested. Let's just say we took the $20,000 and only $300 every month and invested in that S&P 500 ETF with our 10% compound annual growth. An investment like that over 30 years would become $941,166. Yes, almost $1 million. Compounding is a wonderful thing, especially over a long time. If we just forget about tax on that investment, we would have ended up having $303,000 in the bank, even after a 20% tax. It would still be more than the house owner would have. While the one who bought a house would have ended up with only $100,000 in the bank, we would have had over $300,000. And we wouldn't have had the problems all worrying about dealing with plumbers, electricians, new roof, new appliances, new kitchen, and all of that. And what if the house was sold during a downturn? Then everything would have been for nothing. Nope. I'm sorry to say, buying a house to live in it almost never makes any sense when you run the numbers. And please do run the numbers before buying a house or an apartment. I bought a house, not for it to appreciate, but for me and my family to have a firm, safe base, a safe haven. And if it appreciates, fine. If not, also fine. We can keep it forever and we never need to sell it. Eventually, we can rent it out instead. If you instead bought a multifamily building using a company, an LLC that you created, and rented out the other units, this would be a very good deal and a great way to get your multi-million-dollar business started. But that's another video. What do you think? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments, and remember to hit that like button. YouTube really likes it when you do that, and I like that too. Hope to see you in the next video. Remember, keep investing, and invest in yourself. The more you learn, the more you earn. Bye!
I have a dream, that's all I need. I'll make it happen with some work and belief. Know what I want, so I'll take it on. I've made mistakes, but mistakes make you strong. Let's break it down for a minute. I want the crown, I'm gon' get it. You hear me loud, man, I'm winning. Yeah, Charlie Sheen will be grinning. These ladies know that I'm sinning, and this is just the beginning. I'm closing in the ninth inning, there ain't no point in resisting.